So why not kill two birds with one stone? So this is not going to be a typical review. This is going to be a review and a breakdown of why this movie did not really do well. So Babylon was a movie that was written and directed by Damien Chazelle, and it stars Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, Gene Smart. A whole bunch of people are in this movie, and it's about various people in the late 1920s to the 1930s in Hollywood as they navigate their careers, navigate their lives, as Hollywood transitions from silent pictures to the talkies, and all this debauchery, including drugs, sex, profanity, all this really far out stuff. And yeah, that's basically the movie. So I do like Damien Chazelle's movies. I do think he makes very interesting movies. Whiplash, I love. La La Land, I thought was pretty good. First Man was pretty good as well. And so when I heard he was doing another movie, I immediately got excited. When I heard the cast, I was excited. When I saw the trailer for this movie, I was excited. It looked epic in scope. It looked something that it was bigger than anything he'd ever done before. It was big. It was crazy. It was going to be unique. It was going to be a lot of fun. And then I saw some of the reviews. The reviews, for the most part, seemed very divisive. Some people clearly loved it. Some people clearly hated it. And so much has come out now saying how basically this movie bombed and all that. And I saw this movie, and I am very, very disappointed in this movie. I did not like this movie a lot. I would not call it awful by any means, but I would also just say, compared to his last three movies, this is probably his worst. This is without a doubt his worst. And I think it's just such a crushing disappointment that I think I may hate it more because of how disappointing it is. So, what does work in this movie? Well, a lot of the actors do a really good job. Margot Robbie does a really good job. Brad Pitt does a decent job as well. Gene Smart gives a really good performance as well as this journalist who's mainly chronicling all the actors in the movie. Among the supporting cast, the only one who kind of stood out to me was Lee Jun Lee as this burlesque-esque performer. Thought she did a really good job, but I'm going to talk about her character a little bit later. The production values of this movie are astonishing. It's so big in scope. Like, the sets are incredible. The costumes are incredible. The makeup is incredibly well done. The cinematography is really well done. Damien Chazelle's movies are all well shot, and I'm not surprised how well shot this movie is, including in the big party scene, which is the first half hour of this movie. There's a lot of shots in this movie that are just long takes, and I think that's like that's one of the things he does a lot, and I really like long takes, so that's kind of something I just love personally. Also, the score by Justin Hurwitz is also incredible. Just the scope of this movie is just incredible as well. You kind of get the feeling of Hollywood, like how big it is and how vast it is and how unique it is. By the size of this movie, it's incredible. The editing is also very interesting. There are definitely some scenes where they do cut around really fast and just kind of just emulate the style and just the pure insanity of this movie. It's really the editing is pretty good for the most part, even though I would cut this movie down. I'm going to talk about that too. And I also kind of like a lot of the things that they do talk about in this movie, how Hollywood is not really as glamorous as it may seem. Obviously, they're doing all these debaucherous things, and it also shows like a lot of the horrible things that kind of happen on sets, and just thought it's actually not as glamorous as, people like to make it out to be. I kind of like that about this movie. So, what is wrong about Babylon? Well, there's a lot of things I don't like about this movie. One, the runtime of this movie. It is a little over 3 hours long, and it's so much, and I feel like this movie could have been 2 hours at most. And I would have cut out a lot from this movie. I don't know what I would cut specifically, but I would definitely trim it down to at least 2 hours. And also, I didn't really find the lead character played by Diego Calva to be that interesting. He didn't really have an arc. He didn't really have a character. He was just kind of there, kind of being the observer of this movie. And I just felt like his character was just so poorly written that he just didn't interest me at that much. He did a fine job. I wouldn't say he gave a bad performance by any means, but I was also just thinking his character could have been written better. And there are a few storylines that are brought up, but they're kind of just dropped, like Lee Jun Lee. There were times where I saw her in the movie, I'm like, what's her deal? What's her storyline going to be? Turns out there's not really anything. Nothing at all in this 3 hour movie. Also, Jovan Adepo, I believe that's his name. He plays a trumpeter in the movie. He has a storyline for a few minutes. His whole storyline is just dropped, and again, that is really interesting. And again, it feels repetitive at times, and it kind of just got annoying after a while. And when the movie was trying to be funny, it was not funny. There are a lot of gross jokes in this movie, and I'm not talking about drugs or violence or sex or anything like that, but jokes involving bodily functions, including the opening gag, which honestly almost made me gag. And then it's immediately followed up by a different joke about bodily functions. This is from an Oscar-winning director. That one joke, the one opening gag in this movie, is a perfect example of what this movie is. In a lot of ways. I won't spoil it. But it's just so disgusting that I just couldn't laugh. I almost just puked in the theater. And I would just say this movie is just not focused enough. Like, it focuses on Margot Robbie's character and how her character handles her situations. Brad Pitt and Diego Calva. And it feels like there's just no central focus. I guess the idea is that Diego Calva is supposed to be a central focus, but again, he's just not interesting enough to carry this entire movie. Tobey Maguire is just completely wasted in this movie. He's also one of the executive producers, and it's just a pointless role for a pointless storyline. And a lot of it just kind of didn't work. And a lot of stuff that is in this movie, admittedly, has been done before. Brad Pitt's arc has been done to death in a lot of movies. Margot Robbie's arc has been done to death. A lot of these arcs have been done before. Ever since, this era that this movie comes out of. And even though there are interesting themes to talk about, like how we changed to please people, I just feel like it just wasn't clear enough. I just feel like it was just a movie that clearly knew what it wanted to be, and also didn't know what it wanted to be. I usually don't complain about movies that are ambitious, but I feel like this movie was too ambitious. It was too good to bomb, but no, it really wasn't. It was just... disaster is not the appropriate word. But coming from Damien Chazelle's 3 other movies, this is just kind of a letdown. No, not even kind of. It's just a letdown. So, Babylon is a movie that I really can't recommend. The acting is pretty solid. The production values are incredible. The score's great. The editing is decent. The messages are intriguing and the themes are interesting. But the lead character's not interesting. The jokes fall flat. The storylines feel half-baked. It's barely even a love letter to movies. That whole thing is also half-baked. Like, they have this whole montage about movies at the very end, and it just feels half-baked. Like, it just didn't work for me. The Fabelmans was a better movie about Hollywood than this movie is. Think about that. I didn't like the jokes. I didn't like the lead character. I didn't like the storylines. It just felt like it was completely aimless. It just did not work for me personally. I will give Babylon 2.5 out of 4 stars. Stream it. I feel like there are a lot of things that are worth watching. I feel like there are a lot of things that make this movie worth watching, but I feel like it just tried too hard. And for that reason, it just did not work for me. I feel bad for basically beating up on this movie, even though pretty much everyone has been beating up for the last couple weeks. But honestly, it kind of deserves it, because comparing it to his 3 previous movies, this was just a misfire in almost every way imaginable. So, with that being said, I'm going to talk about why I think this movie tanked. Not just because of my review. I feel like there are a bunch of reasons why this movie underperformed at the box office. And I feel like when a movie underperforms, I feel like it's never just one singular reason. I feel like it's just a whole bunch of reasons. And I could come up with at least 8 reasons as to why this movie did not do as well as it did. Number 1, it's being released around Avatar: The Way of Water. I'm going to get around to Avatar: The Way of Water. I've been busy all throughout the holidays. And I'm going to see it again in IMAX, so I'm going to try to review it again sometime after that. But Avatar is just soaking up pretty much every movie right now. Babylon bombed, the Whitney Houston movie bombed, even Puss in Boots, which I just reviewed and thought was really good, fortunately did not do as well as it probably should have. So that's kind of sucking up a lot of the air out. 2, we're still in a pandemic. Now, I know a lot of movies have done really well despite the pandemic, and I know that we have had a few billion-dollar movies, and a lot of movies have been bombing lately. And the pandemic, I feel like most people are kind of just over it at this point. And I feel like with this and like the flu going around and RSV going around, maybe people are just thinking maybe I shouldn't go out and see this movie. I don't know. I really don't know. I feel like most people are kind of just over the pandemic, and I feel like it's kind of changed the way people go to the movies. They won't just maybe people who go like once a month probably won't even do that anymore. Maybe like once every like few months or something like that. Third, the week this movie was released, there was a huge winter storm that basically blanketed a lot of the country. So a lot of people were kind of under travel bans. So maybe not a good idea to go out to the movies during a winter storm. So that's not really its fault or anything. It's just bad timing. They didn't predict a winter storm would happen that weekend that would blanket a lot of the markets that this movie would play well in. Four, the trailers just were not that interesting. Now, I mentioned that I thought the trailers made the movie look epic in scope, but the trailers did not really tell you what the plot of the movie is. And I'm going to be honest, the movie doesn't really tell you what the movie is about. It's kind of just this odd, debaucherous, movie that looks like The Wolf of Wall Street, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The Great Gatsby, and all that. And maybe people just thought, what is this movie? Oh, it stars Brad Pitt and it stars Margot Robbie. Okay, there's no plot whatsoever. So I feel like the trailers didn't really do a good job of telling you what the plot of the movie is. Number five, yep. The 3-hour runtime. Yeah, it takes a commitment to sit through a 3-hour movie. I mean, I've done that a few times. I saw The Batman in theaters 3 times, even though that's a 3-hour movie. But there's already a 3-hour movie that's playing right now, and it's Avatar. And I feel like people would rather see that than Babylon. 6, the mixed reviews. Now, I feel like reviews don't help or hurt a movie, but the reviews for Babylon definitely would have helped it. If this movie had gotten glowing reviews, if it had gotten a fresh tomato on Rotten Tomatoes, if the Metacritic score was at least green, I feel like people would have at least been a little bit more curious. It would have opened a little bit bigger than it actually did. And the fact that it got mixed reviews and then they were like, we're not going to make money on this, so we'll just release it wide, I guess. They knew what they were doing. And they kind of just took a loss on it. If this movie had better reviews, it would have just opened in New York and LA and then expanded to areas like this area. And I feel like it would have done a little bit better if it was... I feel like, obviously the movie I felt was just very but I feel like if the movie was better and probably under 2 hours, it probably would have done a lot better. Also, the stars and the director, Brad Pitt is, he's a good actor. He's not really a big box office draw if you look at his numbers. Margot Robbie, she's not a big box office draw either. I think her biggest movies are ones where she's in a supporting role, like I mentioned, Wolf of Wall Street, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, even something like I, Tonya, which was a modest hit. It wasn't that big. So I would be concerned about the Barbie movie that's coming out. And Damien Chazelle, he's not a big name director. This movie is promoted as like being the next movie from Damien Chazelle. Well, unfortunately, that didn't really help First Man, now did it? Now, don't get me wrong. I like his first 3 movies, but I feel like he's not there yet. He's not at the level of, Steven Spielberg and Quentin Tarantino. But then again, Spielberg didn't really do well with The Fabelmans, unfortunately. So I feel like it banked a lot on its 2 leads and its director, and I just felt like it didn't really think it didn't have the effect that they probably thought it did. And the last one is that I feel like a lot of Hollywood movies just don't really do well unless there's like some sort of interesting hook to it. Like, again, I'm going to go back to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That had Brad Pitt, that had Margot Robbie, but it also had Leonardo DiCaprio and Quentin Tarantino involved. So there was hooks there, but this movie doesn't really have the hooks, unfortunately. So, I feel like this movie bombed for a lot of reasons. Avatar is sucking up a lot of the blood. We're still in a pandemic. The winter storm basically just made basically, the winter storm was just a disaster, obviously. The trailers weren't interesting. The movie was way too long. And the reviews didn't help. The stars and director didn't really help. And maybe it's something that Damien Chazelle was nostalgic for that maybe most people just don't give a shit about. So, those are my thoughts on why Babylon bombed. So, what did you think of Babylon? Do you kind of see where I'm going at with how I felt about how the movie was and why I think this movie tanked? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.